All right, good afternoon. It looks like it is just about time here, so I'll go ahead and get started. I'll begin with Let Children Hear the Mighty Deeds by Isaac Watts. Let children hear the mighty deeds which God performed of old, which in our younger days we saw, and which our parents told. So make to them his glories known, his works of power and grace, and will convey his wonders down through every rising race. Our sons and daughters we shall tell, and they again to theirs, that generations yet unborn may teach them to their heirs. O teach them with all diligence the truths of God's own word, to place in him their confidence, to fear and trust their Lord. To learn that in our God alone their hope securely stands, that they may never doubt his love, but walk in his commands. By way of introduction, my name is Brittany Newton, and I teach 4th and 5th grade at Faith Lutheran School in Plano, Texas. And I was asked today to talk about the combined classroom and how we might serve our students when we have more than one grade together. So I guess a little bit of background on that. For my school, I know I hear about the good old days when we had a number of students in our school, so much so that, according to what I hear, there were even several grades or several classes of each grade. And so now when I talk to people at our church about how the school year is going and they find out that I teach a combined class, I kind of they give me a concerned look about that because that means our numbers are lower and whatnot. And I appreciate their concern, but I think that there are a lot of benefits to the combined classroom in a lot of ways. And so that I and my students might look back on these days and call them the good old days. It is meant to be a practical session, and so as any of you have comments or suggestions along the way, please feel free to interject your thoughts as well. I know that my first experience with a combined classroom came when I was 4 years old, and I can picture this where I was in my family's house with our ugly red carpet on my navy blue couch. I was sitting and playing, and my older brother and sister were studying their states and capitals. And remember that Augusta came up, and before either my brother or sister chimed in, I said Maine. And I remember that possibly because I haven't beat them at anything since then. But it shows, I think, one of the benefits of the combined classroom, that, of course, younger students gain a lot by hearing the things that their older classes are doing. And so they're at least exposed to that information before they're expected to learn it. I see that in my classroom as well, my formal classroom. Obviously, the experience I had was in homeschooling growing up. Another benefit for the older students is that they can reteach things that they know to younger students, and of course that helps them to firm that up in their minds. And I remember having similar experiences. I also have younger brothers and sisters, and so I can remember doing the same thing. If I learned something exciting, I would share it with them. And I do that in my classroom too. I know I will a lot of times have my older students practice things with my younger students, and I think that's beneficial to both. Beneficial to the younger students that they get to have that one-on-one time, and beneficial to the older students in that they get to get some things more firmly rooted in their minds from practicing it over and over again. Another benefit that I've seen from the combined classroom is that students can learn to self-manage at a younger age. I know, I assume that some of you do this too, where you'll be working with one group and another group will need to work on something independently for a while, and so students learn early on how they need to do things on their own and how they can work independently without having so much direct teacher interaction. So I think that's a benefit as well. And then also I think that it's helpful from my perspective that I don't have to relearn all new students another year. So I know coming into this school year that I already have a good idea of who my 5th graders are, because I had them last year. I already know what some of the challenges are that we're going to come across. And so we won't have to go through that get to know you period at the beginning of the year. I find that especially helpful with classroom management, where you barely have to really teach them that again because they remember it from former years. So 3 ways that I do that, and maybe again, please feel free to interject your other suggestions, but 3 ways that I work with the combined classroom are, one thing is planning an alternate schedule for any class where it's not necessary to build one on another. We do that. We do that with Bible, where we alternate Old Testament and New Testament. memory work, where we pick verses for year A and verses for year B, and it doesn't really matter when you get those verses. We do it with our poetry study, where we have a set of poetry recitations that we do for year A, a set of poetry recitations for year B, and it doesn't matter when you get those. And then I haven't done this, but I have thought that it would also be possible to do with science, and because of the way that our curriculum is, at least spanning just a few grades, the way that our curriculum is set up, there's a lot, they're just kind of general science topics, and I think that it would be easy enough to just pick and choose and alternate those, because it doesn't seem like it's necessarily things that build upon each other, at least at the stage that I teach. I also do it with history too, where we have state history, we have Texas state history that they have to have during their elementary years. We also use Veritas Press, and so those can coincide with each other on either end. I'll go ahead and pass these out then. I have some handouts. All right, so then to begin with, we always start off the school day with Bible, and the way that it works at our school. So we have our 5th and 6th graders take catechism class. If they are a member of a Lutheran church, then they take catechism class with one of our pastors. And if they are not a member of a Lutheran church, then they take Bible with me. And we alternate teaching Old Testament and New Testament, and so I end up with 4th through 6th graders in that class together. And the way that I have done that is that I will teach the same content to everyone, and then I give a little bit different assignment to the different grade levels. So it's supposed to amp up just a little bit each year. Usually I start with a hymn that correlates with whatever Bible lesson we're reading. We talk a little bit about the hymn, the words, especially the figures of speech, and that's something that I notice when we're first talking about it. Then the 4th graders don't generally have as much to say as they are figuring out what figures of speech are. But the 6th graders are very good at that, because then they have been doing it for 3 years in a row. And then I don't do, our daily work is basically the same. Usually they just take notes from each day's lesson, so they all have the same assignment. But then what I've done is every quarter they will write a paper, and that's what is included. Starting on page 2 is an example of what I would do for their Bible paper. They all have the same topic. So for our first quarter for this coming school year, we're going to be in the New Testament. And so we will have read all of those stories, starting from the birth of John and Jesus announced down to Jesus raises Lazarus. We would have done that all in class together. And as we were reading through those, we would talk a lot about the two natures of Christ, true God and true man. And so then at the end of the first quarter, we would start writing the paper. 4th, 5th, and 6th grade would all write about how Christ is true God and true man, but you can see that their outlines are a little bit different. 4th graders haven't had as much experience with writing just yet, and since this is just the first quarter, then we keep their outline very basic, and we fill that in together. Then on page 4, I have a rubric for how they're graded. And this rubric is basically, it's the same setup for a few of their classes. And so they get used to seeing this rubric from me over and over and over again. But that shows what my expectations are for them. In 5th grade, it's the same content, but their outline that's on pages 6 and 7. Their outline is a little bit more detailed because they are more accustomed to writing a 5-page or 5-paragraph essay for me. So they get to put a little more thought into it. I included the rubric for them on page 9. And then for 6th grade, the only addition that I made is that they also cite the sources that they use in their paper. We would have done a research paper at the end of 5th grade, and so I know that that's not brand new information for them. We would be reviewing some of that. And so that's one way I do for Bible class. I included their outline as well, and then the 6th grade rubric on page 15. And then turning the page from there, associated with Bible, we also do memory work. And I have 2 Bible verses that I have the students learn each week, and then those repeat every quarter. So I included the whole first quarter for my Year A schedule and my Year B schedule, in case you wanted to look at that. But that way the students get to, I think, instead of just memorizing it and forgetting it, then they get to become familiar with some of those Bible passages. Altogether as a school, we study the catechism, and so I also included the catechism sections that we do, and we do the same catechism sections each year, regardless of what grade. Any comments so far or suggestions that you all use in your classrooms when you're teaching those subjects? Yes.
At what level do you walk them through writing like a 5-paragraph essay?
We do that in 4th grade. I just didn't have it for this because it's at the beginning of the year. But we do that in 4th grade. I know that in 3rd grade that they do a 3-point paragraph. And so the assignment that I gave them was modeled after what I know that they had already done at the end of 3rd grade. But we use Shirley Grammar that has a writing section in it. And so we kind of follow their grade levels that they use for that. Okay. Then for literature, on page 24, I included the list that we use for 4th and 5th grade literature. And I like to, with the books that we have for these classes, I like to keep them separate. So last year I was able to teach 4th grade literature while I had my 5th grade students in band, as we have a band teacher, so that worked out well. And then I was able to teach 5th grade literature when my 4th grade students were in math. But I think you could have literature also, especially at older grades. I think at lower grades that might be more difficult, but at upper grades, by 4th and 5th grade, I think that we could have a Year A and Year B schedule. I have taught literature like that before. Our 4th grade literature is adventure style literature. And then the 5th grade literature, I like to keep it together because of the way that it walks through history. So we start with Hawthorne's Wonder Book, which has a lot of mythology in it. And then we move to Black Ships Before Troy, which is based on the Iliad. And then the Aeneid, of course. And then some Middle Ages works with Sir Gawain and the Canterbury Tales and Robin Hood. And then we end with A Midsummer Night's Dream. So I like the way that I chose that set of literature so that we could walk through history too, and that we could review some of those parts of history, some that they have had and some that they're going to have later. But I think I could do that if I wanted to make a schedule of 4th and 5th grade literature where we walk through that history timeline twice, actually, depending on what works that we use for that. And then for read aloud, I tried to do read aloud a couple of times a week with my students. I know I had a professor who was encouraging us to give our students opportunities for leisure where they don't have to do any assignment, where they just kind of get time to imagine, time to contemplate, time to think and be curious about different things. And so she really encouraged us to try to find time during our day where we can do things that don't require the students to have a written assignment that goes with it or something like that. And so read aloud is one of the times that we have during the day where I tell the students that they just need to sit back and listen, and they just get to imagine the story and go from there. So I have just used this same schedule. All of these works, the Tanglewood Tales, the poems, the sketchbook, and the Tales from Shakespeare, all of those are short stories, so I can just pick and choose which ones I want to do. And I also think that it's a good idea to repeat some of those, so I don't mind if they read it in 4th grade and then we read it again in 5th grade. I think that's good to be repetitive, especially about those quality pieces of literature. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I know my students, when we're looking at the Tales from Shakespeare, they're 4th and 5th graders, so they think love is gross. And so they will always, they know that comedies end in marriage. They think that's nasty, so they always request a tragedy. And so sometimes I give in to their whims also. on that. But that's what we've used for read aloud. Yes?
Do you read aloud every day?
I try to do it 2 or 3 times a week. We're not perfect at it. Any other thoughts that you have on literature or ways that you have done that with your classes, with multi-grades?
I actually have a question. So what do you do for literature, actually? Like, how do you, what do you do with it, with your time?
I like to read a lot of it with the students. I know that we have other teachers at our school that do it in other ways where they will assign them something to read and discuss it. I really like to read it together because I love the discussions that we have, and I love watching it, sort of come alive with everyone together. So I do it a lot that way. We talk, I guess it depends on what book we're reading, exactly what we do with it. With mythology, I like to study that. They do study that also in 3rd grade, so they've also already been exposed to it. But it's good that they can just be familiar with those characters that are going to come up later. With Black Ships Before Troy, we talk a lot about the virtues and vices of the characters in there, and so I'll have them keep a journal of the characters, and so usually that's their daily assignment to do, is that we would read the section together, and then I would give a assignment for them to do in their journal relating to one of the characters or something like that. Some of them we can talk about. There's also a lot of similes in Black Ships Before Troy, so I like to pull out some of the figures of speech whenever possible. And to me, that's another thing that's easier to do when we're doing it out loud, because at their age, I don't want to just say, oh, just go find that without talking about what it is. So
I was wondering, so that way you find it beneficial to have this be a class that you split up?
I think so, yes, because because I like a lot of direct attention instead of just read it and do an assignment. So, yes.
I have, for example, a very proficient 4th grader who's in 5th grade reading, and then if so, what do you do with a really advanced student when it comes time, being 7th grade reading as a 5th grader? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I guess I haven't. I know teachers who will differentiate their literature that way, and I know at our school we do that with math, kind of across the board. But I suppose that's another reason why I do it aloud as a class, because then it sort of evens the playing field when we're all reading it together, so that I can make sure to check comprehension for my students that are lower. But then a lot of the literature that we have is pretty challenging, and so I don't know that I've had a student who said, oh, I totally get Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, move me up to the next grade level. So I think that most of our literature is challenging enough that that they seem to enjoy that part. But yeah, I guess I would just say that that's why we do it all together, so that I can try to explain what we're talking about, and then everybody can be together. But I know that our 3rd grade teacher has done that before, where she does level out her students too, and if she has a wide range of that and that kind of thing. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, then the poetry section. Poetry is another part that when we're talking about what are some ways that we can have opportunities for leisure. Poetry is another section of the day. We do that every day, and there's never a requirement that goes with it, so I don't grade them on poetry, but it's an opportunity that we have to recite together. I usually talk about the background of the poem, why the author wrote it. We talk about the figures of speech that we read in the poem. As we're reciting it, we talk about voice inflection and what that should sound like, and then we recite the pieces every day, and they end up memorizing them, even though it's not necessarily a requirement. I don't know that I could point to a student and say, you say this whole thing by yourself, but all together as a group. I know that they actually did all of these poems for their parents at the end of the year, so they end up committing them to memory. And so then I just have 2 sections of poetry for that, for year A and year B. I was very inspired by Joel Heck's book, Irrigating Deserts. I don't know if any of you have read that, but it's about the education of C.S. Lewis, and he talked about everything that Lewis read and the poetry that he memorized and what that did for him. And so I was inspired to give the students an opportunity to be exposed to that too. And I love how the poetry sticks with them. So one of the poems we did last year was Paul Revere's Ride, and we were also studying a lot of the American founding at the same time. And so my students really liked the section that goes, you know the rest in the books you have read, how the British regulars fired and fled, and the farmers gave them ball for ball. And they would just, whenever they felt moved to do that, whenever we're reading some document like the Declaration of Independence or whatever, then they would pull that part out from what we had studied from poetry, just because they like that part a lot. So I love to see that where they would, bring those things up in other ways. I know I also had a student when we were reading Robin Hood. And at the end of Robin Hood, one of my assignments was that they were supposed to write a eulogy for Robin Hood. And she decided to model hers after Friends, Romans, Countrymen. That was her own idea, but she just modeled hers after that. I thought it was very creative, and also I asked her actually if I could keep it. I should have brought it and read it because it was cool. But I love how the poetry, again, kind of encourages them to go up a level, because a lot of these are not necessarily like children's poems, but there's a lot of good vocabulary in them that the children are exposed to, a lot of good figures that they're exposed to in their poetry too. Any comments on that? Yeah.
When in your days is part of your literature block?
We would usually do this before English. And so it would also be an opportunity for us to, everybody stands up, and I was kind of a stickler about how we're going to stand when we do our poetry and, that kind of thing. So yes, we would do it at the beginning of our English time as kind of a way to start our class. And I would usually do it alongside our the recitation of our Bible verse too. So we would say our scripture and catechism first, and then we would go into our poetry. For English, then we do Shirley Grammar, like I mentioned. And so on page 25, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Shirley. There are probably a lot of other good grammar programs too, but we would say these jingles, and these are jingles that my students have known for several years. They had already practiced them in lower grades, and then they tend to just build on each other. So a good portion of the fourth grade jingles are also fifth grade jingles. They just add a few of them. They add the predicate adjective in fifth grade. And so we are able to practice those all together. It's review for everybody. And then sometimes if I'm introducing one for fifth grade, then I would just tell the fourth graders to look on one of their classmates, and then they can do it along too. And then that gives them the opportunity to be exposed to it before they officially have to know it. And then I think on the back page of that, they have reference sections too, and those of you who use Shirley, I'm sure are very familiar with this. We use the 1997 edition at our school. That's what this is. But these two are also very closely correlated. Mostly I just have to kind of find the page numbers that correlate from book to book. The information is the same. I just have to find out what page it is in each grade level, but we can go over these together too. There's not a whole lot of difference, at least in the one grade level between fourth and fifth. We can do a lot of that together. On page 27 then, this is what their tests look like. And I like to do these a lot of times together too. And this would be where I would sometimes tell, the fourth graders would have their own test and the fifth graders would have their own test. But I would maybe say that the fifth grade can do exercise 1 and 4 on their own while I'm going through information with fourth grade, and then we would switch back and we would go through exercise 2, 3, and 5 together. A lot of it is things that they have done before, and so I would pick anything that's review for them to sort of just do on their own and then check it, and then anything that needs more direct instruction, then we can do that together. So I tend to just switch back and forth when we're doing grammar like that. For writing, we do use Shirley style for our writing. I also like to have the students practice modeling their writing after good writers, and we do that in several ways. Probably the most specific way is with fables and Bible stories. And so on page 28, I included one of the fables that we would use. And so this is something that we would do all together, and then their assignment is just a little bit different from 4th grade to 5th grade, what their expectations are. But I like this, getting to do it with both grades, because I think it gives my 4th graders more confidence that they've already been through this process by the time they get to 5th grade. So we would start by reading through the fable, and we would talk about the elements of the story. Those are on page 29. We talk about the characters and the setting and the plot, the theme, recognition, reversal, and suffering. And usually at the beginning of the year, we would do that all together until we've gotten through several fables. And then especially the things like theme, recognition, and reversal, I guess, somewhat we would still talk about all together, because those tend to be the more difficult of the elements to go through. But we would do that all together, especially at the beginning. And then I would pick some vocabulary words for us to amplify together. So on this page, I underlined sad and fate and heard and reply. And then all together on the board, we would brainstorm what some synonyms are for that. And they all really enjoy doing that together. I don't find that there's a huge gap. Of course, some of the 4th grade words aren't as high level as the 5th grade words, but they tend to all enjoy doing that, and they also enjoy racing to see who can get a thesaurus first to find those words. And I think that it's something that's helpful for the 4th graders to, the first time we go through it, then they can just listen, and then they enjoy participating in that part too. I think I included on page 30 the figures of description that we work throughout the year. And I like to talk about these in our writing and then also in our literature as we come across them too. And so I give the students this list of figures of description and the figures of speech that's on the next page. I give them that at the beginning of the year. And then we just talk about one figure of description and one figure of speech for each fable that we go through. So for the ant and the chrysalis, I chose prosopographia, a description of someone's face. The ant and the chrysalis is the fable where the ant is bragging that he can run around wherever he wants to, and the chrysalis is stuck in its shell. And then, of course, when the chrysalis becomes a butterfly, then the ant is embarrassed about the fact that the butterfly is more beautiful than he is. And so when we're talking about this together, then I might say, what does the ant's face look like when he's all proud that he can go wherever he wants to? Or we might talk about what the ant's face looks like if he's all embarrassed. And again, those are things that we do all together, and everyone writes those down. And then our figure of speech, antonomasia, we would come up with a different name for the ant. We might call him the conceited one or something like that. We would come up with some names together. And then their assignment is to rewrite the fable. They might take the perspective of the ant or the chrysalis, and they would write it from their perspective. And then I would have my 5th graders include the figure of speech and figure of description in their story somewhere. And the 4th graders, I tell them if they'd like to, they may, but they don't have to, so that they get an option for that. And then I have the students read them all aloud to each other. So there is, in some sense, some peer pressure to do a good job. And I think I included the rubric for that, as you can see, is very similar to the rubric they had for their Bible paper too. That's just slightly different for 4th and 5th grade, that they include the figures or don't. And then I also tried to look for any other opportunities for them to model after good writers. This year I had a paragraph from Charles Dickens that had a lot of really good adjectives in it, and also got us thinking about verbs in active voice and passive voice. And so when we would read a book in literature, then I would have them choose a character from the book that we had just read and write a paragraph modeled really exactly after the way that Dickens did his, except with their character in mind, but it would try to be a really close imitation. And then we did that same paragraph, the same section from Dickens, but with different characters, about 5 times throughout the year. And so it was fun to see how their writing improved throughout that time. But I love to look at that too. I like to be on the lookout for good paragraphs as I'm reading literature that we can use to model, because I really think that it's impressive what students can come up with when they are able to model after somebody great. For spelling, we use Spalding spelling. And so on page 34 and 35, I just I printed out what we have for their phonograms. And that's something that we can do all together. They've done phonograms since they were just learning how to read, but we still start at the beginning of the year reviewing their phonograms with flashcards, and that's something that we can do as a group. And then each week, the 4th graders have a spelling list and the 5th graders have a spelling list. And I know that I know people who will level out their spelling list as well and have several groups where, if you have a good speller in a lower grade, then they can work with more challenging words. I haven't done that, but I know a lot of people who do. And so for spelling, I would work with one group's list. We talk about the phonograms, we talk about the spelling rules. I have our spelling rules typed out on page 36 and 37. And while I'm doing that, I would have the other students maybe copy their words 3 times or something like that and give them a different assignment. Yes?
Go back to writing a second. I'm just curious, when you have them do their writing that is more literature-based, do you do that in place of one of the Shirley writing assignments, or do you do that in addition to?
Yes, I usually do it in addition to. I like to use Shirley assignments for, they don't necessarily do them during English, I guess. And so if they have, their Bible assignment is very much looks like with the Shirley style. And so I know they have an opportunity to do it there. Or in history, when they usually write their research paper on a history topic. And so I would teach the Shirley method to them then. So I guess sorry.
The Shirley topics that they have in the book to teach them, and then?
I usually don't. I usually do it based on more what I want for our topic to be. And then I like to use a good portion of our writing time to be modeling either the fables or a Bible story. So I guess I don't stick perfectly to the Shirley method. But I like to use it a lot for their jingles and the grammar portion. For math, I said that we do a math block, and so we have a certain time during the day where all our math classes are taught, and so the students who test and are able to move up can do so if they would like, and that's one way that we can work with our different levels of students. But I have taught 2 grades of math together. We use Saxon math in 4th and 5th grade. And so when I've done that before, then we start with our power-up test where they're practicing their math facts. We can do that part together. And then I would usually have one group start on their assignment. Saxon math is nice where it indicates the lesson that each question comes from. And so I can tell the students that they can work on any question except the one from the lesson of the day. And while they're doing that, then I can teach the other class their lesson for the day, and then we can swap when we're done. I don't know, are there any other ways that people do math? Because that's also one where you would, you can't have an alternating schedule for math. That would be hard, so it builds. That's what we have done. And then for science, we have Bob Jones Science. And I printed out the table of contents for 4th and 5th grade. And they really have, it's just general science, so they hit on different topics. There were just a couple that I starred that were the same. And so I haven't had to teach them concurrently, because like I said, we had a part-time teacher who did that last year. But I think it would be possible to do that on a Schedule A and Schedule B. I might just give the 5th graders more difficult vocabulary or give them a little bit more difficult assignment to do alongside of it. But it seems to me like because there's so many things that we can study in science and they don't necessarily all build on one another, that it would that would be an option if I needed to do it that way. For history, as I mentioned, we use Veritas History, but then we also have State history they have 1 year during elementary grades and 1 year during middle school grades that's devoted to Texas history. And that too, it correlates well with whatever section of history we're studying. And so my 5th graders this year had, last year we did exploration to 1812. This year they'll have Texas history. But a lot of what we'll study in Texas history will overlap with that. They'll get to hear about explorers again. They'll get to hear a lot about the events that were happening in America. And so they kind of will coincide well together, but it doesn't really, to me, matter that much what order it's in. I included on page 42 one of our primary sources that we use. Veritas history is very heavy on primary sources, especially in the kind of the upper part of elementary school. And I think that the primary sources are sort of equally difficult. We tend to go over these all together because they include a lot of vocabulary words that the students are unfamiliar with. This is one of my personal favorite of our documents that we get to go through, the speech of Patrick Henry, "Give me liberty or give me death," although I don't think I included that part for you. But we would go through usually paragraph by paragraph. We read it all together. I tell the students to underline any words that are unfamiliar to them, and then we would discuss those together. So I underlined in the first paragraph some of the words that might be unfamiliar to the students. We'd write them all up on the board and give a definition to them, and then I would probably summarize what the paragraph was about, because most of them are pretty difficult to read through. But that way they can be exposed to it, and I think everyone is kind of on the same level, because it's just kind of difficult sometimes to get through those documents. Any other comments on what you all use for history or science that's beneficial, or how you work through those primary sources? Yes.
I have done the years thing with mine, so that we do the same thing. And sometimes I just vary my expectation for them. So we use the story of the world.
Okay, sure.
And I teach that to K to 3s. And so we're the small school, we don't have the ability to differentiate with those grade and subjects. So our whole school goes on a cycle.
Okay.
So this year we're approaching the modern age. So the whole school is doing that.
Okay.
But anyway, like with the story of the world, then you read it and you're supposed to do narration and other things. And so with my older students, the 3rd graders, they're at the point where they can be generating these sentences. The kindergartners get to write the title of what the chapter was or whatever, and then draw a picture. And so we'll generate that picture on the board together, and then they can put up on their own papers, and I keep it, and it turns into their own little history book.
Okay.
So they work one for each of the stories. But then they're at that 1st, 2nd grade level. We write it together, and we'll put it on the board. And we also do a KWO, so we'll do our outline, a keyword outline, in case you're familiar with that. Sorry. And so the 3rd graders are really like picking out those. They're at that stage where they're getting able to figure out what are the most important things. They want to include the detail. Remember, we had a silver horse or whatever. Do we have to include that? And so then that helps. And theoretically, we then reverse that the next day and you write it in the paragraph. We don't have time for that. But,
Right.
but it does work out really well to do the cycles.
Yes, and that's the story of the world books are nice because they are engaging. I'm sure still. I know I've done it for older grades, but the stories are written where I would imagine that even a kindergartner is still engaged with the story.
Their seats.
Yeah.
Right.
And then they would get it again, because then how many times would you, because there are 4, right?
They'll get it 3 times.
Okay, yeah, at a different level of.
They get the same time period 3 times. We don't use story of the world past, well, this year we're changing it a bit, but past 5th grade, we use other things, but it's still that time period.
Okay.
So they'll get it at least twice.
Yeah, so it's not the same every year, because this class has been together, I think, since 2nd and 3rd grade. It was just the way the numbers are. I happen to have 4 5th graders, and so since there's a small group, then they've been combined. And our middle school teachers prefer not to combine if possible, because they're departmentalized starting in 6th grade. Right, and so we're going to have, so I'll have 4th and 5th again this year, just so that they don't have to be concerned about that yet in 6th grade. And then right now, all of our younger grades are their own independent class. So yes, it's kind of the same thing where it just varies from year to year what our numbers look like. Yes.
Also, going back to the science, I used Apologia Science, and it was nice that they have the junior workbooks and then the older workbooks. So then I was able to K1 and 2 use the junior, and then second on up was the older ones, and then I just write, and then like the younger ones would just write like one sentence, and then the others would continue on.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't even realize that they had that, but they already kind of have it differentiated for the grades.
Yeah, kind of. They have more stuff. Like the older book has like a crossword. They do, and the other one would have like a cut and paste, like the younger kids.
Oh, that's nice. I like that. And then I think that's just the last page that I included was the art curriculum that we have. We have Arts Attack curriculum, which is on DVD. Very nice for those of us who are not artistically inclined at all, that they watch the DVD. But this is just from their grade 5, and their projects take 2 or 3 sessions anyway, and we just have art once a week. So I could split that up between 5th grade or have the 4th grade options, and that I would just try to make sure that I would cover elements of art. I would make sure that they have color, line, shape every year. But as far as their artist appreciation or their cultural appreciation, to me it doesn't really matter when you would hit those different areas. Okay, so then with that, is there any other discussion, any other questions that people were hoping to talk about? Yes?
You only do Latin, is it once a week? No.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, I didn't. I think I skipped over Latin. So Latin, I think we had on the schedule 4 times a week, and then I would try to work independently with one grade 2 days out of the week, and then the others would have an assignment to do. We use Martha Wilson's Latin, and I do think I included copies of that worksheet too. But it's nice because there are a lot of things in Latin that they can do on their own. They always make their vocabulary flashcards, and that's something that they can do independently or be practicing them with a partner. And then parts of their worksheet are usually copying down their declensions or their conjugations, and that they can do a lot on their own. We would try to do translating together. We'd try to talk about the derivatives together, and then any new concept, of course, together. But I could divide it up that way where they would still at least have some Latin 4 days during the week, but I would just divide up the time that I taught them. Yes.
So you're saying in your school most of your grades are single and you're double. How do you sell that to parents? I mean, how do you get parents on board with this year my kid's in a combined class, but last year they weren't and next year they won't? Do you have any issues with that?
I know that I have talked to several parents about that, and the concern that has come up is they've just asked me, well, have you ever done that before? And I've only taught 3 years at this school, but the majority of my teaching had been in double grade, so I don't know if that just reassured them or what, how that worked. I do think that because we've had one, we also have the advantage where we have the part-time teachers that help, and so I will usually mention that too, that they're getting the individual instruction and whatnot. Sometimes they like to see the schedule, just how it's going to work, and that gives them some peace of mind. But this particular class, I guess last year's class, had been together for 4 years, and so I don't think
Those parents wasn't.
Right, yes, but this incoming class, there will probably be some more explanation to do.
I think another thing that's comforting for parents, if you have a multi-grade classroom, is that the younger students pay attention to what you're teaching at a higher level.
Mm-hmm.
And they pick up concepts that are a year above them.
Mm-hmm.
It works the other way too. The older kids might have missed something.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that, like I might be teaching 4th grade, I might be teaching 3rd grade math, and I'll see a 4th grader put their pencil down and stare at what I'm teaching, because I think they need a reinforcement.
Sure, yeah.
So I think it works both ways, that they can learn higher or they can get,
Mm-hmm.
get a good review.
Yes, I know that's a good thing to bring across to parents, I think, because I always like to hear that it's going to be.
And parents always want to know that you've had experience in that area.
Right. Yes.
We had a parent was rather hostile about the combined classrooms, and his daughter would be starting her school very young. And one thing that kind of caught him in his, well, how could you expect a first grader to be okay with a third grader, and then they'd play together, and well, what does a family look like? Kind of like your first example that you started off with, and in a family, is everyone the same age, and they all do this, so you have to learn that, and then when you get out of school and you're in the real world, when you go to work, is everyone your own age, and do you, so it kind of stopped him and helped him with this perspective that, okay, you're also learning how to interact with people who aren't exactly the same age or the same ability level, and it does help create a family feel then, especially when you've got the olders helping the youngers, and the youngers are looking after those olders and aspiring to, when I get up there, then I can do that too, or whatever.
Yeah.
I think they're concerned because in some progressive ed classes, you work in a group, and then the smartest kids do all the work, and then the other kids don't have to do anything, and everybody gets the same grade. Well, oh shoot, I forgot what I was going to say. I'll come back.
Okay. Okay.
So are you thinking like the way you set up your classroom, do you try to separate, like, okay, all fourth grader desks are on this side, fifth over here, you keep your pencil over there, like, a lot of different.
I guess I like to have them, I like to keep them together in their groups, but I also like to put the new kids among the ones who have been there. So I know one year, and it also kind of depends on what my numbers are, but I know one year that I just put I had 5th and 6th, and I just put my 5th graders like right in the middle. And that way I didn't have to do as much of the classroom management. It was whoever was around them who had already been in my class that's like, we don't do that, or this is how you sharpen your pencil, or whatever. So I do think it's nice to be able to have them together so that you can say, okay, everyone eyes up here when we're doing an independent session, but I definitely like for them to be a little bit mixed too, so that the older students can be positively influencing whoever is new.
If you had one group like working on an assignment or doing something while you were teaching the other group, did some students have a hard time paying attention to their work and not just watching you, or like did you ever play music or like something to, I don't know.
Sometimes perhaps. I think that they were pretty, because they had been together since they're younger and they're kind of used to that wasn't always a problem. And then I would, my room was arranged so that I can have a group. I would have like a separate table, and so I could have, if I wanted to work independently with some of the students, then I could just have them come over to the table and everyone else could stay at their desks. So my classroom allowed for me to make it a little less hopeful, invasive to them, I guess. That's how I done that day.
I know when I had the multi-class, it didn't happen the first week, but you learn which kids are going to be distracted, and I had quiet areas. And so if I was going to do a lesson where I would be in front of one group, I would say, Johnny, if you'd like to move to a quieter spot, I'm okay with that. Before I would start to teach, and a lot of times they wouldn't.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yes, sure, you got it.
In response to her question about what parents were concerned, I think they're concerned with the idea that maybe an older student is going to be teaching a younger student. So, the way you have it set up, if you can comfort them with that idea that you're going to be the teacher, pair them up and let the older kids do all the work.
Right.
That helps parents too.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I know every class is different, but roughly, what kind of class sizes are functional for mixed levels compared to, say, non-mixed levels?
Yeah, I'm not even sure. I was talking to like my great-grandma who was telling me about how she had 40 students kindergarten through 4th grade. Of course, that was back in the day, but it can be done. And I think we used to do that when we had one-room schoolhouses, and now that's something that's a major concern. or it seems like parents are very concerned about that. I think especially if you're paying money for your child to be at a private school, you want them to have a smaller class size. Just the way our numbers have been, I think I'm expecting around 23 this school year. I had 19 last school year. And for us, it seems to be mostly just what fits the number of students that fit in the classroom. I don't know that it would matter whether I had 25 all of one grade or 25 mixed. I think our cap is just put on based on number of seats in the classroom. But I don't know, maybe others have a better answer for that.
It can depend on the needs of your students.
That's true too, yeah.
This last year I had a couple really high needs students and I only had 17 students, but those two took so much of my time and energy. I felt like I had 1,000 students.
Yeah.
But if you have really self-sufficient, self-motivated, then you could have 50 of them. But I think it's the class dynamic that
yes, kind of dictates how difficult that is.
difference.
Yes.
So you said you had 19. Was it that like 4 of them were 4th graders and the rest were 5th that they combined them? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Curious as to numbers. So they combined based on a certain number of children. So you wouldn't have one teacher in a room with just 4 children?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yes. I think.
Just curious as to why the combination. And with 19, that sounds like a.
Yes. Yeah. It was just because there were only the 4 in that one class, so it didn't really necessitate having, if we had to call another teacher and pay another salary for that. So I think that's why they made that determination.
Where does faith kind of draw the line as far as a minimum student where they're going to combine? The minimum enrollment per grade where they can.
I don't think that we have a rule on that necessarily. It's kind of from year to year and how the budget looks, I think. Because in the upper grades then, I know in our 8th grade we had 1 student in our 8th grade. And but they were able to work out with our high school teacher and with our middle school teachers, they were able to kind of compensate for that student because her family has been really involved in our school and we wanted to make sure she had an opportunity to be in our school and go to our high school and so forth. So I don't know that it's a hard and fast rule. I think it's more of a board decision on when we would hire a new teacher. So
We do have documentation saying that our maximum class size is 12.
okay.
And it gets us into trouble sometimes because we just had a junior kindergarten class that was 14 and we couldn't really turn them away because we were siblings and
yes.
so we let that slide, and we had a few parents that were kind of feeling, well, if you're only 12, kind of.
Yeah, so I suppose maybe it is nice maybe to have those things as just board discretion where you can make those decisions based on what you have each year. So
how might you go about selling this to a staff that's universally opposed to combining grades, but it seems to be a necessity? Not that I would find myself in such a situation.
I guess to me, I don't think it's that, especially when I'm talking about these different things that are just like alternating years, that doesn't put a whole lot more stress on me than it would just having 1 grade, So that's not, I don't know, I don't think it puts you out a whole lot. I think that I find myself busier, but from my perspective, I would much rather teach at a classical Lutheran school where I know that that's going to be a reality because of just the situation we have. I would much rather be able to teach at my school where I get to teach about Jesus and I get to teach using the classical model, and if that requires teaching several grades, then I would still prefer that. Do you have a suggestion on?
Yeah, one suggestion would be starting with the upper grades and combining, starting because the younger you go, the less independent they are, and the hallmark is to grade.
Yeah.
So if it is necessity,
you start at the upper
you don't
grades.
have to necessarily combine all grades at once, then just kind of starting from the top and trickling down.
I do understand what you're talking about though, because I know there is that sort of attitude about the from the teacher perspective, that this is, I don't know, I've heard teachers who are
'Cause I've had-
exasperated by that idea, but.
Yeah, and I've had kindergarten in with other grades, and they require so much more
Right.
attention that it just doesn't really work well for
Uh-huh.
a lot of the kindergartners.
Yeah, but I guess as a teacher, I just think too, like, I mean, I can look at the budget also and see that it just wouldn't be possible for us to have another teacher, you know, so I don't, and.
We do pay our teachers that do split classes just a bit more.
Oh, okay.
At the school I'm at.
Okay.
Because it's recognizing that, yes.
Yeah, so there's more.
Sets of lessons, like,
Uh-huh.
there's extra work, grading, well, maybe, but just because of the two different curriculums.
Right, right.
I think so much of it is with the marketing. When our kids didn't have parochial school available, they were in public school. My husband and I both went to parochial, always had combined grades, and in the town we were at, there were 7 of each grade level. It was a huge school. And then they marketed this new MAG class, a multi-age group, and how wonderful this would be. Kids could learn from each other, and people were clamoring to get into that grade. So a lot of it is.
Was the branding, wow.
Our church has a school, very small, we have 5th through 8th grade together.
Uh-huh.
We have one family leave because, or one child, because we found ourselves having to combine kindergarten with a 1st and 2nd, and they said, we don't want that, we want our kindergarten should be a unique experience. So part of it, most of it is in the front perception of what they see and what they're going to get. And to try to encourage that, yeah, this is a wonderful experience.
Yes, yes, to speak positively about that. It's important. Yes.
One another thing, I mean, I don't know where you're at, but if you're near a school that already does combine grades, to maybe be able to get your faculty into that school for a day and let them observe and see how it runs, and maybe even have an opportunity to talk to a teacher that's doing it might help, you know, if it's possible from where you're at.
All right, well, thank you very much. I hope you all have a good afternoon.